The church bells of Ashgrove, Vermont, rang low and solemn as mourners gathered for the funeral of Vivian Langston, the family matriarch. To the rest of the town, it was the passing of a prominent figure. But to Audrey Langston, it was something far more intimate, a personal devastation. At 32, Audrey stood quietly beside the casket, dressed in a navy coat and gloves, the late autumn chill biting at her skin. The wind carried the scent of dried leaves and pine as she watched her mother, Caroline, dab her eyes. Nearby, Gregory Langston, the man she had called Dad for as long as she could remember, stood rigid and unreadable. His eyes never once met hers. The rest of the Langston family filled the first few pews in practiced symmetry, every member groomed for appearances. But Audrey wasn't thinking about appearances. She was thinking about how out of place she felt, how she'd always felt. Even here, saying goodbye to the only person who'd ever made her feel like she belonged. "Your grandmother always made the best out of bad company," Preston Langston whispered as he passed her in the aisle, his tone just snide enough to make her blood simmer. Preston, Gregory's nephew, had inherited the worst traits of the Langston line: entitlement and venom, dressed in expensive wool. Audrey didn't respond. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She focused on the words being spoken at the pulpit, but they faded in and out like static. Her mind was stuck in a memory, Vivian's hands, warm and soft, gently braiding Audrey's hair when she was a little girl. "You're not like the rest of them," she used to say. "That's not a flaw, that's a blessing." When the ceremony ended, the mourners spilled out into the gray daylight. Audrey moved to the edge of the crowd, hoping to disappear. But Martin Keene, the family's longtime lawyer, approached her with a folded umbrella and an unreadable expression. "Audrey," he said with a respectful nod, "your grandmother left instructions for me to speak with you privately." She looked at him, surprised. "Now?" "If you're able. Her will is scheduled to be read in 3 days. But what she left for you, it's separate." Audrey hesitated, then nodded. "Let's go." Martin's office hadn't changed since she last visited a decade ago. Dark wood panels, heavy green curtains, and the lingering scent of pipe tobacco, even though he hadn't smoked in years. He handed her a thick envelope sealed with Vivian's signature wax stamp. "She made me swear not to open it," Martin said, his tone low. "She said you'd understand what to do when the time came." Audrey broke the seal carefully, her fingers trembling. Inside was a handwritten letter on monogrammed stationery, its first line as cryptic as it was chilling. "The truth lies in blood and silence. Do not trust the story you were told." Her throat tightened as she continued reading. The letter didn't name names, but it hinted at betrayal, at secrets buried beneath decades of family pride. Vivian had known something important. Audrey looked up at Martin. "She never told me any of this. Why now?" "She didn't want to burden you while she was alive. She thought she'd have more time," Martin replied. "She asked me to help if you needed proof of anything." "Proof of what?" Audrey asked. Martin only shook his head. "That I don't know, but I think you're meant to find out." Later that evening, Audrey returned to Langston Manor, the sprawling estate built generations ago on money, timber, and reputation. The house looked unchanged, cold, pristine, and curated like a museum. Yet something felt different now. Vivian was gone, and the hollow echoes in the hallway seemed louder. She entered the sitting room where Caroline was nursing a glass of wine. Gregory stood by the fireplace sipping scotch. As Audrey stepped in, their conversation fell silent. "I didn't see you at the burial site," Caroline said flatly. "I had to meet with Martin," Audrey replied. "Grandma left me something." Gregory's eyes narrowed, the glass frozen at his lips. "Did she now?" "It was just a letter," she said quickly, reading the tension in his stance. "She said there's more I need to know." "There's nothing more to know," Gregory said, his voice clipped. She was a sentimental old woman. Don't go digging up ghosts. Audrey bristled. If there are things I was never told, I deserve to know. Gregory set his glass down hard enough to clink against the marble. You think you're owed answers? You should be grateful for what this family gave you. I was grateful, she snapped, until I realized I was never truly accepted. You've treated me like a stranger since I was a child. Enough, Caroline cut in sharply. Not tonight. Gregory turned away, dismissing her with a wave. The will is being read in 3 days. That's what matters. And when it is, don't expect anything beyond what you deserve. Audrey stared at the back of his head, fury and confusion surging in her chest. And what exactly do I deserve, Gregory? He didn't answer. That night, Audrey wandered into her childhood bedroom, untouched since she'd left for college. The wallpaper was faded, the books on the shelf dusty but familiar. She sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out the letter again, and read Vivian's words until they blurred. Blood and silence. Her eyes scanned the room. Then, as if guided by instinct, she opened the bottom drawer of the old dresser. Inside was a worn photo album. She flipped through pages until she stopped on a picture she didn't recognize. Vivian, standing beside a young man with dark eyes and a confident smile. He had his arm around a woman who looked suspiciously like Caroline, holding a baby. The photo was labeled in Vivian's handwriting, Nathaniel, July 1991. Audrey's pulse quickened. Nathaniel, not Gregory. She stared at the baby in the photo. Something in her gut twisted. For the first time in her life, she questioned everything. Audrey couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, the photo of Nathaniel, July 1991, on her nightstand, glowing under the soft light of a nearby lamp. The image gnawed at her. The man's face, Vivian's inscription, her mother's youthful smile as she held a baby that had to be her. Everything about the photo felt intimate and hidden, like a relic meant to stay buried. By morning, the doubt had calcified into something stronger. Resolve. Audrey drove across town to her mother's cottage just after sunrise. The narrow dirt road was glazed with frost, and the orange light filtered through the barren maple trees as she parked out front. Caroline answered the door wrapped in a silk robe, her hair swept up, clearly caught off guard. "Audrey," she said, blinking. "Is something wrong?" "I need to talk," Audrey replied. "Now." Caroline hesitated. "Come in." The warmth of the house was jarring, cozy, quiet. A teapot whistled in the kitchen, and a worn photo of Vivian rested on a side table. Audrey stepped into the living room and held out the photograph. "You need to tell me who this is." Caroline took it. Her face tightened instantly. Her eyes flicked to Audrey's, then away. "I found it in my dresser drawer, in my old room," Audrey continued. "His name's Nathaniel, July 1991. That's me, isn't it?" Caroline set the photo down slowly. "Yes," she said softly. "That's you." Audrey didn't blink. "Then who is Nathaniel?" Caroline exhaled shakily, her hand trembling as she poured tea into 2 cups. "Sit down, Audrey." "No, I want the truth." For a long moment, Caroline said nothing. She stared into her teacup as if it could offer her a script. Finally, she spoke. "Nathaniel is your father. Your biological father." Audrey felt like her bones had turned to ice. "I don't understand. Gregory raised me. He's my father." "He raised you," Caroline said, her voice low. "But he's not your blood." Audrey sank onto the edge of the couch, the air thick with disbelief. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Caroline looked older in that moment, tired, worn by decades of silence. "Because I made a choice, a complicated one. Nathaniel and I were close, very close. We were young. He was brilliant, charming, and stubborn. He was set to start a new job in Seattle that summer. I found out I was pregnant just weeks before he left. Did he know?" "I told him." Caroline nodded. He wanted me to go with him, but your grandmother was adamant about staying here. She thought Seattle was too far, too unstable. She was very protective. Of me. And of you. And Gregory? Caroline flinched. He offered security. A name. Respectability. He loved me, in his way. But more than that, he loved what marrying me meant to the family legacy. He agreed to raise you as his own. I thought I was doing what was best. Best for who? Audrey said, her voice trembling. For me? Or for the Langston name? Caroline reached for her hand, but Audrey pulled away. I lived my whole life trying to earn his approval, Audrey said bitterly. And he never gave it. Not once. Caroline's eyes glistened. I'm sorry. I never meant for you to feel unloved. Audrey shook her head. It wasn't just unloved. I felt like a mistake, a shadow in my own family. Caroline whispered, You were never a mistake. But the words rang hollow. That afternoon, Audrey returned to Langston Manor. The atmosphere had shifted. Gregory was nowhere to be seen, and Preston sat in the parlor with a brandy flipping through his phone. He smirked as she entered. You look like someone who just opened the wrong door. Cut the sarcasm, Audrey snapped. I know the truth. Preston raised an eyebrow. About Nathaniel. About who my father really is. He didn't look surprised. If anything, his smile widened. Ah. So the pieces are falling into place. You knew? Let's just say family history has a way of revealing itself. Eventually. You've been waiting for this, Audrey realized. You think this disqualifies me from the will. It's not about what I think, Preston said lazily. It's about the law. You're not Gregory's daughter. You don't carry the Langston bloodline, and you can't prove Nathaniel ever claimed you. That puts you in a gray area. Audrey's stomach turned. Vivian would never allow that. Preston leaned forward. Vivian is gone. And Gregory plans to present DNA evidence at the reading to contest your inheritance. He says you're not family. I am family, Audrey hissed. You were, Preston replied. Now? That's debatable. She stormed out, her pulse pounding. Gregory's plan was clear. Undermine her lineage, erase her from the will, and consolidate the estate. But what they didn't know was that she had Vivian's letter. And her determination. Audrey spent the evening in her grandmother's study, rifling through journals, boxes, anything that might hold another clue. She needed proof of Nathaniel's intent, of Vivian's knowledge, of her own rightful place in this family. In the bottom drawer of Vivian's antique desk, Audrey found a small wooden box wrapped in ribbon. Inside were locks of baby hair tied in 2 separate bundles, labeled Audrey, 6 months, and Vivian, 1941. Audrey's breath caught. Vivian had preserved DNA. A plan began to form. The next morning, Audrey drove 2 towns over to a private lab recommended by Martin Keene. She handed over the box and signed the forms for expedited testing. I want to compare both samples, she told the technician. One belongs to me, the other to my grandmother. I need to establish maternal lineage. The woman nodded, then asked, Do you have any other samples? Audrey hesitated. Not yet, but I'll be back. That night, Audrey stood outside the old greenhouse behind the manor, the wind biting at her coat. She held the last piece of the puzzle in her hand, a photo Vivian had tucked into the pages of her gardening book. It was Nathaniel again, older this time, his features worn but familiar. She knew she had to find him. Somewhere out there, the man who gave her life was still living in the shadows. And if she had anything to say about it, that was going to change. The next morning, Audrey Langston stood alone in the greenhouse, her breath fogging the cracked glass as the sun began to rise. Dew clung to the ivy climbing along the walls, and dust danced in the light. This place had been Vivian's sanctuary. Audrey could still picture her grandmother pruning roses with gloved hands, humming quietly to herself, unbothered by the rest of the Langstons' chaos. Audrey closed her eyes. "Give me strength, Grandma." She turned and walked back toward the manor. Every step felt heavier than the last. Inside the estate, the atmosphere was ice cold. Gregory Langston sat in the dining room, reading the paper like nothing had changed. He glanced up when Audrey entered but said nothing. She could sense it. He knew what she was digging into, and it threatened him. "I know you spoke to Caroline," he said flatly, without looking up. Audrey stood still. "I did." Gregory folded his paper, slow and deliberate. "Let me give you a piece of advice. Some stones should stay unturned." "Funny," she said. "Grandma used to say truth grows in the light." His mouth twitched. Vivian always had a soft spot for fantasy. She believed in fairness, in blood. "You said so yourself." That got his attention. He set the paper down and looked her in the eye. "You think digging up your roots will change your place here? You think it'll get you what she left behind?" "I think it already has." Gregory's jaw clenched. "Be careful, Audrey. This family doesn't forgive easily." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I'm demanding acknowledgement." Upstairs in the attic, Audrey spent the next few hours searching through boxes marked Langston Family Archives. Dozens of old documents, family trees, and handwritten ledgers filled the space. She traced them backward through the generations, every name carefully preserved, every male heir highlighted in bold. But something stood out. Gregory's name appeared in handwriting different from the rest. The ink was newer. Below it, a barely legible note. "Adopted in '68. See Harold's personal files." Her breath caught. Audrey grabbed her phone and snapped a photo of the document. Then she descended into the study once more, heart pounding. She found Martin Keene's number and called him immediately. "I need to see you today," she said. "It's about Gregory." He agreed to meet her at a cafe on the edge of town. When she arrived, Martin was already seated, flipping through his leather-bound notebook. "I found a note," Audrey said without waiting. "In the attic. It says Gregory was adopted." "Is that true?" Martin nodded, slowly. "Yes, it's true." Audrey stared. "And no one told me?" "It wasn't widely known. Harold, the patriarch, had an affair. The child born from it was Gregory. He took him in quietly, under pressure from Vivian. So Gregory isn't a Langston by blood." "No." Audrey sat back, stunned. "That changes everything." Martin nodded again, solemn. "It does. But be warned. Gregory's built his entire identity on being Harold's heir. If you use this information, it will explode, legally, personally." "I don't care," Audrey said. "He's trying to erase me from the family, from Grandma's will. He's using DNA to question whether I belong, when he's not even blood? Then you'll need proof. Certified, and fast." That night, Audrey sat in her old bedroom staring at the flickering candle she'd lit near the window. Her grandmother's letter, the family tree, the adoption note. All of it lay spread across the bed like pieces of a puzzle. She reached for her journal and began sketching a timeline. 1991. Audrey born. Nathaniel leaves for Seattle. Caroline marries Gregory. 2006. Vivian gives Audrey a pendant with the Langston crest. 2023. Vivian dies. Gregory prepares DNA challenge. Present. Proof emerges. Gregory not a blood Langston? Everything converged on one truth. Audrey was the only direct descendant of the Langston bloodline. 2 days before the will reading, Audrey visited the DNA testing center again. The technician greeted her with a smile and handed her an envelope. She opened it right there. Mitochondrial DNA match confirmed. Subject 1, Audrey Langston, is a direct maternal descendant of Subject 2, Vivian Langston. Tears welled up in Audrey's eyes. "Thank you." The woman smiled kindly. "Do you need this notarized?" "Yes. Immediately." She paid for expedited notarization and made copies. That evening, Audrey returned to Langston Manor. As she walked in, she passed Preston in the foyer, who raised a brow. "You look like someone with secrets." "I'm just following the truth," Audrey said. Preston smirked. "Truth is flexible." "Not when it's written in DNA." The smile faltered. "What did you say?" Audrey walked past him without another word. In the drawing room, she found Gregory pouring himself a drink. His gaze narrowed. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said. "So are you." He took a slow sip. "You think a lab result will rewrite history? I think the bloodline you're so obsessed with skipped you." Gregory's hand tightened around the glass. "Vivian knew," Audrey said. "She always knew." "She pitied you," he snapped. "She gave you crumbs to keep you loyal." "No," Audrey said. "She gave me everything. And now I'm going to claim it." He chuckled darkly. "You think the will favors you? Let me save you the suspense. I have evidence you're not my daughter. That makes you nothing but a house guest." "Then I guess the Langston name is yours in title only," Audrey replied. "Because you're not blood either." His face turned to stone. "You were adopted. Harold took you in. But we both know that doesn't make you a Langston." For the first time, Gregory looked rattled. "You have no proof," he said. "I have a lot more than you think." They stared each other down, the fire crackling behind them like a third witness to the standoff. Audrey turned on her heel. "See you at the will reading." The morning fog was thick over Ash Grove as Audrey Langston stood outside the DNA testing center for the second time in 2 days. This time, she wasn't there to prove her maternal link to Vivian. That part of the puzzle was already locked in. Now, she had a new question to answer. Was Nathaniel Langston truly her biological father? The technician greeted her by name. "Back so soon?" Audrey handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a single strand of hair she'd recovered from an old photo frame of Nathaniel in Vivian's attic. The frame had contained a locket, hidden behind the backing, just like Vivian had always done with her secrets. "I need to compare this to my DNA," Audrey said. "Can you do that?" The technician examined the envelope and nodded. "It'll take about 24 hours, but yes, we can run a paternity comparison using the mitochondrial and nuclear markers." Audrey exhaled. "Do it, and please rush the results." As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A text from Martin Keene. "Meeting moved. Gregory filed notice of intent to contest your standing. Claims lack of biological connection. We need to talk. Urgent." Audrey met Martin in his law office an hour later. Papers were scattered across his desk, and his reading glasses hung from a chain around his neck. "He's pushing hard," Martin said as she sat down. "Gregory submitted a preemptive challenge to your claim on the estate." Audrey's heart pounded. "How can he do that, before the will is even read?" "He's trying to box you out," Martin explained. "He's presenting DNA evidence that you're not his daughter, claiming it voids any family-related claims you may have." "But I'm a Langston," Audrey snapped. "Through Nathaniel, through Vivian." "Yes," Martin agreed. "But if we can't prove that, if your claim to Nathaniel is dismissed, then his argument gains weight. That's why the test results matter." "They'll come in tomorrow." Martin nodded. "Good. Because I've reviewed Eleanor's will. It was amended 6 months ago. It specifically references my bloodline. Those words could mean everything. Or nothing, depending on how the court interprets them." Audrey rubbed her temples. "Gregory's not even a blood Langston." "That part is complicated," Martin said cautiously. "There's no official record of the adoption, no paper trail. Harold may have kept it quiet to preserve the family image. Then it's my word against his. For now." That night, Audrey returned to the estate to find a letter slid under her bedroom door. No name, just her name written in block letters. She opened it cautiously. "Audrey, you're out of your depth. Walk away now, or everything you think you know will come crashing down. This isn't just about inheritance, it's about legacy, and you're not part of it. P. She crumpled the letter, fury rising in her chest. Coward, she muttered. The next morning, the DNA test results arrived. Audrey tore open the envelope in the privacy of her rental car. Paternity match detected. Subject 1, Audrey Langston, shares 99.998% match with Subject 2, Nathaniel Langston, across paternal markers. Probability of relationship, 99.9%. Audrey laughed, half relief, half disbelief. You were right, Grandma, she whispered. You always knew. She sent a scanned copy to Martin immediately, followed by a call. We have it, she said. Proof. Martin exhaled through the line. Then we're ready. But the game wasn't over. Later that day, Audrey was called into an emergency meeting at the estate. The family had gathered in the dining room: Caroline, Gregory, Preston, and a couple of their longtime financial advisors. What's this about? Audrey asked. Gregory gestured to a chair. Take a seat. She didn't move. Suit yourself, he said. We're here to clarify expectations before the will reading, and perhaps avoid unnecessary embarrassment. Preston leaned forward. You've been investigating a man who walked out on this family 30 years ago, and using his name to stake a claim you don't deserve. You mean Nathaniel? Audrey said calmly. My father. Gregory's nostrils flared. A man who abandoned his responsibilities, who never gave you his name, never signed any acknowledgement of paternity. Because you and Caroline kept him out of the picture, Audrey shot back. You built a life off of someone else's child and now want to pretend it never happened. You're clinging to old stories and fragments, Gregory said. That won't hold up in court. We've already submitted our DNA analysis to the estate's legal team. Audrey pulled a folded document from her coat pocket and tossed it on the table. So have I. And unlike you, I'm actually a Langston. Caroline flinched. Preston went pale. Gregory read the page, his mouth twitching at the words. We'll see what the court thinks, he muttered. No, Audrey said. We'll see what Vivian thought. Because she changed her will. And you can't rewrite that with threats. Gregory leaned in, voice low and sharp. Don't fool yourself. You think a name on a paper gives you power? It doesn't. And the people you're going up against play a different game. You should walk away. Audrey met his eyes. I'm not afraid of your games. You should be afraid of the truth. Later, Audrey retreated to her room and dialed Martin again. I'm worried they'll try to discredit the lab, she said, or claim I faked it. I've already arranged for sworn statements from the technicians, Martin replied. And we'll have the chain of custody notarized. And the letter from Vivian? She asked. The one she left me? I'll bring it with me, he confirmed. It may not be legally binding, but it shows her intent. Audrey nodded slowly. Tomorrow's it? Yes, Martin said. Be ready. That night, Audrey wandered back to the greenhouse one last time. The moon was high overhead, casting silver light across the glass walls. The roses were gone, but their scent lingered faintly. She stood in silence, clutching the locket she'd found behind Nathaniel's photo. Inside was a pressed violet and a tiny folded scrap of paper. To my granddaughter Audrey, truth will always outlast power. I believe in you. Audrey closed her eyes. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for identity, for dignity, for the right to belong on her own terms. And tomorrow, she would take her stand. The Grand Library at Langston Manor had never seen so much tension packed into one space. Dark mahogany shelves lined the walls, filled with aging volumes and family records. A marble fireplace burned low in the background, more for ceremony than warmth. Audrey Langston stood near the far window, looking out onto the leaf-littered grounds as the rest of the family took their seats behind her. Gregory Langston sat stone-faced, flanked by Preston, who wore a smug look that dared anyone to challenge him. Caroline sat near the rear, nervous, her hands folded tightly in her lap. At precisely 10 a.m., Martin Keene entered, briefcase in hand, flanked by a young notary and a court recorder. The reading of Vivian Langston's will was about to begin. "Thank you for being here," Martin began. "Per Vivian Langston's instructions, this will is her final legal testament, amended 6 months before her death and certified in the presence of 2 witnesses." He pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the polished table. "As there are claims to be addressed before we proceed," Martin continued, "I've received documentation from multiple parties questioning heir legitimacy. Those will be recorded and resolved accordingly." Audrey stepped forward. "Before we go any further, I want to state that I am prepared to defend my right to be acknowledged as Vivian's biological granddaughter and a legitimate Langston heir." Gregory scoffed. "You are not my daughter. This entire charade should be dismissed." Martin lifted a hand. "And Mr. Langston has submitted DNA results to that effect. However, Ms. Langston has also submitted certified lab results confirming biological paternity through Nathaniel Langston, who is conveniently dead and unable to confirm any of this," Gregory shot back. "Yet," Martin said calmly, "we also have DNA confirmation linking Audrey directly to Vivian through maternal lineage. The science speaks for itself." Preston leaned forward, sneering. "Science is one thing. Legitimacy is another. Nathaniel never claimed her. He never even acknowledged her existence." Audrey took a breath and reached into her coat. "But Vivian did." She unfolded a yellowed letter and placed it on the table. "This is a notarized document written by my grandmother 6 months before her passing. It states, in her own words, that I am her granddaughter by blood and intent, that she amended the will to reflect that, and that she believed I was the only heir worthy of the Langston legacy." Martin took the letter and held it up for the court recorder to document. "For the record, this was delivered to Ms. Langston separately from the estate package and is in line with the updated will." Gregory's face reddened. "This is outrageous. A letter doesn't replace bloodline." Audrey turned to him. "You want to talk about bloodline? Let's talk about yours." The room fell silent. Martin opened another file and slid a document across the table. "This is a notarized record from the Langston family archives, including a note handwritten by Harold Langston, your adoptive father. It confirms that Gregory Langston was not born of Langston blood, but adopted after Harold's affair in 1968. There's no legal paperwork, only this handwritten admission." Gregory's voice was ice. "You're reaching." Audrey stared him down. "You've built your whole life pretending to be something you're not. And now you want to erase me to keep the lie alive." "You're illegitimate," he growled. "And you're a fraud," she said. Caroline broke the silence. "Stop it, both of you." But it was too late. The room had shifted. Power, once solidly in Gregory's grip, was slipping fast. Martin cleared his throat. "If we can proceed." He opened the will and began to read. "To my grandson, Preston Langston, I leave the antique watch collection and the Blackstone Vineyard property. I hope he finds purpose outside of paperwork and bitterness." Preston bristled but said nothing. "To my son Gregory, I leave the family portrait gallery and my personal letters to Harold. May they remind him of the weight of silence." Gregory's jaw clenched, his fists tightening in his lap. "To my granddaughter, Audrey Langston, I leave the Langston House, the family trust in its entirety, the Langston art collection, and all my personal journals and estate holdings. She is my legacy, by truth, by blood, and by choice." Gasps filled the room. Preston jumped to his feet. "She manipulated her." Martin remained composed. "This will was signed in the presence of 2 witnesses. Both are here today." 2 elderly witnesses in the back nodded, each confirming the signatures. "This is theft!" Gregory thundered. "She doesn't deserve any of it." Martin's voice stayed calm. "Gregory, the will is legally binding. Any attempt to contest will require you to provide contrary documentation, which, based on the current evidence, will not stand up in probate court." Gregory turned on Audrey. "You've destroyed everything this family built." She met his glare with steady eyes. "No, you destroyed it when you built it on a lie." After the reading, the room slowly emptied. Preston stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Caroline approached Audrey in silence. "I should have told you," she whispered. "You should have fought for me," Audrey replied. Caroline looked down. "I was scared." Audrey nodded. "So was I. But not anymore." Martin packed up his files. "We'll begin the transition next week," he told her. "It's yours now." Audrey walked through the quiet halls of Langston Manor, the same halls that once made her feel like a guest in her own story. Now, every step echoed with ownership, not of bricks and title, but of truth. She stood in Vivian's study, sunlight falling on the worn desk and leather chair. In the corner sat the old family tree, newly updated. For the first time, her name had been penned in ink, not pencil. Audrey Langston, heiress. The days that followed the reading of Vivian Langston's will were strangely quiet. The manor, once a stage for calculated conversations and cold stares, now felt like a different place. The tension had drained from the walls, leaving behind silence and space for something new. Audrey Langston sat in the sunroom, her fingers brushing over the spine of one of her grandmother's journals. The pages smelled of lavender and dust. Each entry was written in Vivian's elegant hand, observations on family, bits of wisdom, fragments of poetry. One page, dated just a few months before her passing, stood out. "Legacy is not what we leave behind in stone or in silver. It's what we plant in the hearts of those brave enough to fight for the truth." Audrey read the words over and over. Vivian had known, not just about the tangled lies, but about the war that would follow her death. She had written that will with clarity, determination, and love. Downstairs, Caroline lingered near the grand staircase, unsure whether to enter. When Audrey saw her, she gestured her inside. Caroline sat slowly on the couch, hands clasped. "I've been thinking about what you said, about fighting for you." Audrey stayed quiet, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I failed you, Audrey," Caroline said, voice trembling. "Not just by keeping secrets, but by pretending silence could protect you. It didn't. It just kept you in the dark." "You made the choices you thought you had to make," Audrey replied, "but you never trusted me with the truth, and it cost us both." "I know." There was a pause, long and painful. "I loved Nathaniel," Caroline said suddenly. "He was wild and full of promise. But I was scared. Vivian wanted him to go west, chase his career. She wanted me to stay and carry the Langston name. I thought marrying Gregory was safe." "Was he ever kind to you?" Caroline gave a weak smile. "Kind enough, but never loving. Not the way Nathaniel was, and definitely not the way you deserved." Audrey looked away, her voice softer. "He hated me for not being his." "No," Caroline said firmly. "He hated himself, for knowing he'd built his life on someone else's child." Audrey closed the journal and placed it gently on the coffee table. "I'm not angry anymore," she said after a moment. "Just sad. We lost so much time." Caroline's eyes welled with tears. "Maybe now we can rebuild something new." Audrey nodded. "Maybe." By the end of the week, Gregory had officially vacated the estate. No legal battle followed. Perhaps because he knew he'd lose, or perhaps because he couldn't bear the public exposure. Either way, he was gone, leaving behind only shadows and silence. Preston, on the other hand, sent a scathing letter through a legal intermediary demanding reconsideration. Martin Keene replied with a simple line, "All claims must be supported by evidence. To date, yours are not." With the estate settled, Audrey turned her attention to the future. The Langston house, once reserved for private family gatherings, would open its doors to something new, a writer's retreat, inspired by Vivian's journals and her love for truth-telling. "This house was a prison," Audrey said to Martin as they walked the grounds, "but it can be something else, a place for voices that haven't been heard." Martin nodded, smiling. Vivian would have liked that. Audrey glanced up at the windows, catching her reflection in the glass. Her dark eyes, her thoughtful frown. For the first time, she saw someone who belonged here. Not by name, not by inheritance, but by story. That spring, the first group of writers arrived. Young, ambitious, hopeful. Audrey welcomed them herself, introducing them to the quiet gardens, the sun-drenched library, and the greenhouse that now bloomed with restored roses. Each visitor received a journal bound in deep blue leather. Inside the cover was a quote from Vivian's writings. "Tell the truth even when it trembles, especially then." Audrey wandered through the rooms in the evenings, listening to the scratching of pens, the laughter in the dining room, the warmth of something real growing in a house once ruled by cold tradition. One afternoon, as she walked past the family portrait gallery, she paused at a new frame on the wall. It wasn't a Langston heirloom. It was a photograph she'd taken from Vivian's desk, a candid shot of Nathaniel holding baby Audrey, both smiling in the sunlight. Beneath it, she had engraved the words, "Our beginning was silence. Our legacy is truth." Months later, she received a letter from a Seattle address. Inside was a brief note and a small box. "I'm sorry I left. I never stopped thinking about you. Nathaniel." The box held a pendant, etched with a single word, Audrey. She held it tightly, tears brimming, not out of grief, but from the weight of finally being seen. As summer turned the estate golden, Audrey stood once again in Vivian's greenhouse. She inhaled deeply, surrounded by the hum of bees, the rustling of vines, and the scent of fresh blossoms. She thought about everything she had lost, about everything she had claimed. And then she smiled. Because in the end, she hadn't just reclaimed an inheritance, she had reclaimed herself.